Thank you for joining me today. I'm Allison Baruti Sarbararia, and today we'll be discovering young children's development, learning, and growth. So let's dive on in. Today we will be discussing 6 areas of development. The first one will be social and emotional development. This is how young children navigate relationships, not only with themselves, but with others. Next, we'll talk about language development. We'll talk about receptive language, what a child can understand, and expressive language, what a child can say or produce. Next, we'll talk about physical or motor development, both gross or large motor development, as well as fine motor development, and perceptual development, so the senses such as vision or smell. We'll then talk about cognitive development, and this is children's memory, how they think, how they reason, followed by development of the self or self-awareness. So this is how children identify themselves and how they think about their own thinking as well as others' thinking. And then creative development, so originality, imagination, divergent thinking. So as I just mentioned, we'll start with social and emotional development. So first, an emotion is a feeling or reaction derived from one's mood, circumstances, or relationships. And we know that emotions are present at birth, so they're present in newborns. And newborns experience 2 emotions, we believe. They can experience pleasure, such as when they're nursing or when they're feeding. And they also can experience distress. And this is very evident in young children because we hear them experience their distress through cries or through screeches. There are both basic and complex emotions. By 8 to 9 months, researchers believe that infants experience all basic emotions. So basic emotions include things like happiness, fear, disgust, sadness, anger, and surprise. So those are our basic emotions, and they're universal throughout humanity. All humans experience these emotions. By around 18 to 24 months, researchers believe that infants start developing what we call complex emotions. Complex emotions need an understanding of culture, norms, or of others. And these are emotions such as guilt, pride, or shame. And they vary from culture or country, from one culture to another. Another aspect of social and emotional development is social skills. Between 4 and 6 months, infants distinguish between different facial expressions. So they can distinguish between a happy face and a sad face, for instance. And we know that young children, especially young infants, really enjoy looking at faces. It's one of their favorite objects to look at. By 12 months, infants can use social referencing or looking at a caregiver for cues about how to respond. So whether a situation is inviting, whether they should proceed, or whether something is dangerous and they should use caution. They look at their caregivers for some kind of cue or sign. It's important to note, though, that infants and toddlers are able to recognize and respond to emotions, but their skills are far from mature. Young children still have quite a bit of difficulty recognizing subtle emotional signals, and they also have a really hard time determining if someone's faking an emotion. And this is good to know as a caregiver, as a parent, that if you're having a rough day, if you're smiling, laughing, pretending that things are okay, that's what your child's going to pick up on. So we can really shape the environment that our children are in based on how well we fake emotion sometimes. When we combine social skills and emotions, we get emotional regulation. And these are simple techniques that children start using to help regulate their emotions. So if they're upset or distressed, to help calm themselves down. We know by 4 to 6 months, infants use a simple technique such as thumb sucking to help calm themselves down. As children become older, They rely less and less on external supports. So very early on in life, the first few years of life, children rely heavily on external supports. So their parents, their caregivers to help them regulate their emotions. They're not very good at doing this on their own. But as they get older, they learn strategies and techniques to help regulate themselves. And some of these are mental techniques. For instance, children might use counting or visualization or role taking to help calm themselves down or help regulate their emotions. And these are many techniques that adults use as well. Children also become better and better at matching their emotional regulation strategies to the situation. So they may learn that in public situations, talking out loud and going through the steps may not be socially appropriate. So instead they use visualization or counting in their head to help them. There are a number of things that parents and caregivers can do to help foster young children's social and emotional development. One really key factor is family relationships. Children who come from families where there are close, respectful relationships tend to have closer peer relationships and tend to have better social skills and emotional regulation. So treating the child with respect and treating those around you with respect is really important. Another aspect is helping children identify their emotions. So actually labeling the emotion and saying, I see that you're sad right now. It looks like you're crying. Those are all things that help the child identify, okay, this is how I'm feeling internally, because the child may not know that. So really giving a name and identifying an emotion. Also, teaching children self-regulation strategies. These may come naturally to us and we don't think about them, but they're something that have to be learned. So helping a child learn how to regulate their own emotions. So talking about counting or talking about taking someone else's role are all important techniques to help children regulate their emotions. Providing children with alternative behaviors is also really key. So children may not know what a more socially appropriate behavior is. So instead of saying, stop hitting, you may want to say, we use gentle touches. Or if you're angry, you can hit a pillow, but you can't hit your sister. And finally, talking about emotions and labeling emotions, not only for the child, but in ourselves. It's okay to say, mommy's really upset right now, or mommy's really frustrated, or daddy's really frustrated. It's okay to say, and then to explain why it is you're frustrated, in a very simple way, and label emotions. Because families who label emotions more have children who are then better able to regulate their emotions. The next domain that we're going to discuss is language development. And the term infant actually comes from young children's language development. Infant literally means not speaking, or one who is unable to speak. And this is a good descriptive of young children, of infants, whose first form of communication is crying. The only way that an infant can communicate that they're hungry or that they need a diaper change or that they're too hot is through cries. So it's not to annoy their caregivers or frustrate their caregivers, but it's their way of communicating basic needs that the infant has in order to survive. As infants continue to develop their language, they next do something called cooing. And this is repeating vowel sounds. And it happens around or shortly after 2 months. And this is when it's really cute to be holding an infant and they coo at you. Following cooing is babbling. And babbling is putting a consonant and a vowel together and repeating it, such as ma, 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 ba, 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 ba. And children do this sometime after they start cooing. It really varies greatly depending on the child. But something very interesting is happening in that infant's brain. That around 10 months of age, infants begin to only distinguish sound differences that are meaningful in the language or languages that they hear spoken directly to them. So children begin to become very primed to the language that is spoken to them, that they hear on a regular basis. And this could be one language, it could be 2 languages, it could be 5 languages, as long as that language is directly spoken to them by a caregiver, a parent, an older child. These are not languages that they hear on TV or on the radio. It's through direct human communication. And we'll talk more about what's going on in an infant's brain in the course on brain development. So again, we're talking about infants babbling. By their first birthday, infants can start to speak their first word. It may be on their first birthday or shortly after their first birthday, right around that time of 12 months. And these are simple words such as cat or go or ball. And something amazing happens between the first birthday and the second birthday. Children go from speaking one word to speaking a few hundred words in a 12-month period. Their language just explodes, and if you see this on a graph, it looks like an S. It just shoots up. And infants also start putting together 2 words at a time. So instead of just saying one word, they'll put 2 words together. Red ball, for instance. As children continue to develop, they put more words together, so 3, then 4 words together. They start speaking in complete sentences. And by age 6, they have a vocabulary of more than 10,000 words, which is pretty impressive. It's also important to note that children can understand more words than they can say, and this is true of adults as well. So children have what we call expressive vocabulary. Those are the words that they can say. And their expressive vocabulary is smaller than their receptive vocabulary, or the amount of words that they can understand. So it's important to make that distinction when we're talking about children's vocabularies. So what can we as adults do to foster young children's language development? Well, one thing that we can do is speak directly to children starting in infancy. And again, this is really important that infants have an adult or have multiple adults that speak directly to them, to make eye contact with them and speak to the infant. That's what an infant's brain is primed to pick up on. Another technique is reading. Starting in infancy, reading to children on a regular basis. This is a great way to form those close relationships that we talked about and really bond with the child. You can read books about emotional development, looking at different faces, so smiley faces, sad faces, angry faces, and talk about emotions. And also that helps the children develop vocabulary. So it helps their language development, and it also helps their social and emotional development. So reading can be really key. Also, adult-child interactions through naming objects. So just playing games with children where you go around and you just point to an object and you name it. If a child goes around and says an object, such as ball, add a modifier to it, such as blue or big. Providing age-appropriate definitions is also helpful. So talking to a child about what objects are. So if the child points and says table, you say table. Yes, it has 4 legs or 4 posts and a flat top. You eat there. That's where you like to eat your Cheerios. So defining words for children. And then finally, engaging children in conversations. So again, these conversations are going to be pretty one-sided at first. You're going to be there talking to your baby. Oh, look at your little toesies. They're so cute. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little toesies. Oh, are they so tasty? Things like that. And your baby's going to maybe giggle, smile at you, coo at you. But pretty one-sided conversation. But as your child gets older, you start feeding on their conversation. So if they talk about a ball or a cat, you start describing a ball or a cat. You start relating that word back to the child's life. Yes, we have a cat at home. Our cat has stripes and blue eyes and a tail. So starting to talk more about whatever the child's interested in, really following the child's lead. As children get older and older, these conversations are going to become more complex and children are going to take a larger role in the conversation. But starting in infancy with conversations. The next domain we're going to discuss is physical and motor development. So just like language is rapid during the first 2 years of life, so is physical development. And because of this, young children need to consume a high number of calories relative to their weight. So per pound, infants and young children eat a lot more calories or need a lot more calories than an adult would need. And by age 2, this growth has started to slow down. But it's really important that children get the nutrition that they need during the first few years of life, because malnutrition can have long-lasting and permanent effects on children's physical development as well as their cognitive development. The best way to know if an infant is getting enough to eat is if they're gaining weight and growing as expected. So going to those well baby checkups where they check the baby's weight, length, and head circumference and making sure that's grafting up. So if your doctor has any concerns or your child's caregiver has any concerns, they'll address them in those appointments. But that's really the best way of knowing how much the infant needs to eat. During the first few years of life, there are major advances in locomotion as well. A newborn baby has very limited locomotion. They can lie on their back, they can wave their arms and their legs, they can turn their head side to side, and that's about it. They can't roll over yet. They have very limited control over their limbs. But during the next few years, they'll go from basically being motionless to being able to hop and run, which is pretty impressive. Even over the first year of life, there's great advances in locomotion. So between 6 and 12 months, infants begin doing something called creeping and crawling. And that's where they move their arms and sometimes their legs and begin to move around. By around a year or 12 months, most infants are walking. By age 2, they do something called a hurried run. Toddlers do this hurried run, or they toddle. That's why they're called toddlers. Between ages 2 and 3 years, children start hopping. And around age 5 or 6, they do what we call a true run, where they can change directions quickly. They can actually coordinate their legs in a true run. They also can hop long distances. So again, it takes a number of years to develop these skills, but children continue to improve their locomotion skills over the first few years of life. So I just talked about gross motor or large motor skills, so let's talk about fine motor skills as well. So by 4 months, infants can successfully reach for and hold objects. However, they really use their fingers and not their thumb. It's not until 7 or 8 months that infants begin grasping with their thumb as well as their fingers. By 5 to 6 months, infants begin to coordinate their hands and start using their hands together. And most 1-year-olds can reach for an object with just one hand. By age 2, children can reach for an object with 1 or 2 hands, depending on the size of the object, so they can make that distinction whether they need 1 hand or 2 hands. By preschool, many young children are able to complete complex tasks such as feeding themselves, clothing themselves, independently or with limited help. And something to note is that although it may be messy, letting babies and young children feed themselves with their fingers or with spoons is really helpful in developing these fine motor skills. I know it makes a mess all over the table, all over the floor, but if you can do it with a tarp under the high chair or out on a porch, it really helps develop these fine motor skills in young children. Now that we've talked about motor development, let's talk about perceptual development. And perception is the process by which the brain receives, selects, modifies, and organizes incoming nerve impulses that are a result of physical stimulation. So things like smell and taste, touch, hearing, and vision. These are all perceptions. At birth, infants have a keen sense of smell and a highly developed sense of taste. And we know this from studies that have been done, known as carrot juice studies. So these are studies where some women drank a lot of carrot juice while they were pregnant and other women didn't. And then around 6 or 8 months after they gave birth, they introduced carrots to the infants. And usually when infants are introduced to new food, they make a face, they kind of spit it out, they might push it away. They don't really like new foods. But for the infants whose mothers had drank a lot of carrot juice during pregnancy, they went, yum, 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 carrots, very tasty, and were acclimated to carrots much faster than infants whose mothers had not drank carrot juice. So this is pretty good evidence that infants' smell and taste starts developing in utero, and is pretty well developed. Newborns also respond to touch, and there's pretty good evidence that they also experience pain. So touch is highly developed by birth. In utero, infants can hear. They can hear sounds. They mostly hear their mother's voice, their mother's heartbeat, sounds of fluid sloshing around, things like that. So they can hear pretty well, and by 6 months after they're born, they can distinguish pitches as accurately as adults can. At birth, the visual system is well developed, but vision itself is not. So the eyes or the eyeball structure is developed, but it needs input from the environment for the visual system to develop. So here's an idea of what infants can see. So newborns really can't see very well. Things are pretty blurry, most likely. They can't see colors super distinctly. They do like high contrast. So they like to look at high contrast images. You can get books that are high contrast. Those are black and white books. They like to look at objects that are high contrast, so such as sunlight coming in through blinds. They may like to stare at your forehead and hairline because that's high contrast. Those are the type of things infants like to look at because that's what they can see early on. As they go from newborns to 6-month-olds, their vision becomes clearer and clearer, and their acuity improves. So what are some things that adults can do to help foster young children's physical and motor development? Well, one key thing is ensuring good nutrition. That's really important for young children, especially in the first 2 years of life, and monitoring children's growth through well baby checkups or having a healthcare provider check up on the baby often. Also, providing opportunities to play both inside and outside are really helpful, especially for these gross motor skills. So crawling, walking, running, hopping really develop when children have the opportunity to explore and to move around in their environment. Also, providing toys and materials that children can manipulate is helpful, especially giving children opportunities to do messy activities with their fine motor skills, such as feeding themselves, is helpful. Demonstrating new skills and providing opportunities for children to practice new skills is helpful. And also ensuring that children have visually interesting environments is important. So remembering that children need visual input for their vision to develop. It doesn't just develop on its own. If a child's in a blank room or in a dark room, their visual system won't develop. It needs input or stimulation. So it's really important that young infants get that stimulation by looking at large patterns. Looking at black, white, and red patterns is especially interesting to them. And also noting any signs that the vision may not be developing normally, such as the eyes crossing, the eyes wandering, or the infant's not tracking objects across the room by 6 months. Those are all signs that an infant should be seen by a specialist to get their vision evaluated. Moving on to cognitive development, it's important to note that young children's thinking is different from adults' thinking. And it's different in a number of ways. One way it's different is children's thinking tends to be egocentric. And you may know some adults that you think their thinking is egocentric, but children can't help it. That's just how they think. So it's not a choice. And egocentrism is difficulty in seeing the world from others' viewpoints or from another's viewpoint. So children really only view things from one perspective, their own. And it takes time for them to understand that other people actually have different perspectives than their own. Also, young children tend to think that inanimate objects have lifelike characteristics or properties, such as feelings. So they may talk a lot about how their stuffed animals have feelings. And this is just a characteristic of young children's thinking. They attribute lifelike characteristics to inanimate objects. Another characteristic is centration. And this is only focusing on one aspect of a problem and ignoring other equally relevant aspects of a problem. So they may only focus on one part of the problem and solve one part, but it doesn't solve the problem altogether. And also, appearance is reality. So they just don't understand that things can be different than how they appear. Again, going back to emotions and how if you fake emotions, children aren't very good at knowing that you're faking them. Whatever they see is how it is for them. So if they see you smiling, you must be happy. So again, appearance as reality. Part of cognitive development is memory. And we'll talk about memory a little bit when we talk about self-awareness as well. But memory can be implicit or explicit. So for the first 18 months of life, all memory is implicit. So what is implicit memory? Implicit memory is unconscious memory, or remembering without thinking. So examples of implicit memory are things like riding a bike or buttoning a shirt. You don't have to think about it, you just know how to do it. It can also be a warm or safe feeling you get when you hear a song that your parents used to sing to you as a baby. So it can be related to feelings as well. And by 2 to 3 months of age, children can remember past events for a few days or for a couple of weeks. But again, these are not autobiographical memories. That doesn't happen until the preschool years, where they can actually string memories together and form a sense of self. Around 18 months, there's a shift where some memories are still going to be implicit, but explicit memories start to form. So explicit memories are memories of past events. So while riding a bike might be an implicit memory, the first time you rode the bike could be an explicit memory. So we remember explicit memories oftentimes in the form of biographical memories or memories of our own lives. I'm also going to talk a little bit about brain development, and I'll talk much more about brain development in my course on brain development, so I'm just going to really touch upon it here. So this is some pictures of the brain or some diagrams of the brain. And the brain develops from the back or from the stem, the brainstem to the front where the forehead is. So if you put your hand where your neck and your head meet in the back, that's where the brainstem is. If you move your head forward to where your forehead is, that's where your frontal cortex is. So that's how the brain develops. And it's important to note that the human brain is not fully mature until age 25. So it takes 25 years after birth for the brain to develop fully in a human. So the prefrontal cortex and the frontal cortex are the parts that develop the most slowly, and they're responsible for things like planning and reasoning. So if you're wondering why you can't reason with your 2-year-old or your 3-year-old, that part of their brain hasn't developed yet. It's going to take many, many more years before it develops. So there are a number of things that parents and caregivers can do to help children's cognitive development. First of all, they can create environments and experiences in which the child learns how the world works. This really helps children transition from that egocentric, that centration, those characteristics of early thinking to more mature ways of thinking about the world. Also, new experiences that are slightly ahead of the child's knowledge level is really important. So really challenging children cognitively. So asking questions and having them explain how something works to you can be one great way of helping to challenge them. Interactions with adults and peers are really key. This is how children learn about others and learn about role taking, learn about seeing the world from others' perspectives. Is through interactions. So the more interactions they have, the more likely children are to develop more mature ways of thinking. And then also it's important to note that play really helps with cognitive thinking. Play allows children to create worlds and to reason through those worlds and to understand how different things connect with one another. So play is the work of children. So providing children with a number of opportunities to play really can help advance their cognition. So the next area of development is self-awareness. And this has to do with understanding that one exists over time. And one exists independently. And again, this happens around 18 to 24 months. So around the time that explicit memories start to form, self-awareness starts to form as well. And children begin to realize that their past self is connected with their present self. So things that happened in the past kind of form or help define who they are. One really common way that young children express their identity is through possession. So that's why children often say me, mine, my so much, and have trouble sharing objects, such as toys, because possession is one way that they identify that they are independent and that they are independent of others around them, is through possession. I have this and you don't have it. So although that can be frustrating to caregivers, that's where it's stemming from, is this idea of developing self-awareness. Also, children often identify themselves through physical characteristics, and is often how they describe themselves. So they may say a statement like, I am a girl, I have brown eyes, I have curly hair. Things like that help them distinguish who they are. Something else also happens with self-awareness, and this is that young children begin to realize that people have their own thoughts, beliefs, and intentions. So just like the child realizes that they have thoughts, beliefs, and intentions, they start recognizing that others around them have these thoughts, beliefs, and intentions, and that they're separate from the child's own. So around 1 year of life, children begin to understand that actions are meant to accomplish a goal. This is the age that you start seeing children get frustrated if something's taken away from them or they're told no, they can't do something, because they start realizing that their actions are meant to accomplish something and that they're somehow being prevented from accomplishing something that they want. Between ages 2 and 5 years old, children develop something called theory of mind. So theory of mind goes something like this. They understand that others may think or perceive something differently than the self. Also, others have their own intentions and goals, and these are linked to their behavior. So around age 2, children begin to realize or become aware of desires, and they begin to express these desires with words. Around age 3, children distinguish between mental and physical worlds. So they start realizing that there's a world that happens around us, and there's a world inside of our head where we can think things and imagine things, and that may be different than the physical world around us. And around age 4, children begin to understand that beliefs are related to actions. So if we believe something, like we believe that it's important to share with others, that should lead to an action, such as sharing with others or being kind to them. So adults can help young children develop self-awareness in a number of ways. First, they can help children develop language that provides children with the ability to label and describe their mental states. So again, just like it's important to be able to label emotions in order to help regulate them, labeling mental states as well. Also, through interactions with adults and older siblings and peers, children begin to realize that mental states and behaviors are related. So someone may believe something and then they behave in that way. Also, programs that celebrate children and families and cultures can really help children develop self-awareness as well. So these are programs such as preschool programs or educational programs or enrichment programs that really connect children's school experiences or experiences outside of the home to their home experiences, and really honors children's families and their cultures and differences amongst children and families. And finally, I'm going to touch upon creativity as our last domain and just briefly go over creativity. So infants learn about and explore the world through their senses. So infants put lots of things in their mouth to taste them and to explore them. They learn about the world through vision, through hearing. So they're very sensory based. By age 2, children begin to participate in singing, playing, and making sounds and scribbling. So children start to express their creativity in these ways. During the preschool years, children start to engage in dramatic play or fantasy play. So this is where children take roles and pretend to be someone else. It might be, some people call it dress-up play. And by age 6 or 7, children start to understand simple jokes and develop a sense of humor. So they might start getting jokes and start telling jokes. Up until this age, most children don't understand jokes very well. They may repeat jokes, but they don't really understand them very well. But by 6 or 7, they can actually understand the humor behind jokes. Just like the other domains, adults can help foster young children's creativity. One way is to provide children with different opportunities to explore creativity. So help them experience music, art, and dance. Also provide areas where children can engage in pretend play or fantasy play, and maybe engage children in that type of play. So say, okay, let's pretend You're the mommy and I'll be the baby, and play house. Ask children to describe their artwork when they draw something for you. So instead of just empty praise like, oh, wow, that's great, ask them to actually tell you about it. Say, can you tell me about your drawing? What is it? What is this here? What is this over here? And have them describe it to you. And you'll find out a whole bunch about what they're thinking and different things they can imagine. Also building with blocks or mega blocks, bristle blocks, different types of building materials can really help children explore their creativity. And then again, asking children to tell you about what it is that they just created is a really great way to foster that creativity in them. So thank you for taking the time to explore children's learning, growth, and development with me. And if you have questions, feel free to shoot me an email, positiveparentingperspectives@gmail.com. You can also visit the website, positiveparentingperspectives.com. And there'll be other videos posted, other videos in this series posted, as well as other modules available. And if you have questions, you can also submit a question online. Thank you so much. Bye.